Welcome to No Better Death, the podcast that knows while you can die no better death than your own, that doesn't mean we can't take a look for the unusual and noteworthy in the deaths of others. Each week we'll take an in-depth look at some out-of-the-ordinary deaths and the events surrounding them. This show will contain explicit language and graphic details. I'm your host, Sick Grayson. How's it going, everybody? Hope this episode finds you well. Everything's fine here at the Grayson house. Still cold and snowy. Not sure if we're still in a polar vortex or not. It just sort of seems like a normal winter here. But it has been really cold lately, so I hope you're all staying warm. And hopefully we're all getting a little bit closer to springtime. Some nice warm weather would be much appreciated about now. A quick update for those of you who sent some well wishes to Miss Grayson. So far, the tests haven't really found what's wrong with her stomach. It's just ruled out a bunch of things that could have been wrong but aren't. And some pretty bad ones, cancer and stuff like that have been ruled out. So we still don't know what the problem is, but at least it's nothing serious as far as we know. So what are we doing this week? Murder They Wrote. We're talking about murderous authors. And episode 21, Death Nerds, getting closer to that 25th episode that breaks a show, according to a statistic I read one time. I probably mentioned it before, but supposedly like 25% of all podcasts give up by episode 10, and 25% of that remaining percentage gives up by episode 25. So just a few more episodes and we'll have beat out like 44 out of every 100 podcasts. Statistically, that will make this one of my more successful ventures. And I have you to thank for coming back time after time to listen to me read you shit that you can easily Google and read on your own. Before I sat down to record this episode, I got a notification of a YouTube review on the Roz Williams episode saying that it was an hour of some guy reading what you can find on Google and the official Roz Williams site. I'm not sure this person's familiar with what a podcast is, but that's kind of the thing, There's only really like three kinds of podcasts. There's conversational, there's fictional story, and there's research-based, or some combination of the three, and this is a research-based show. I look things up. I wasn't there for the shit, and I don't have anybody to interview, so yeah, this show kind of is me presenting my weekly book report about some fucked up shit to people. What did you expect when you click play on a podcast? And who listens to my show on YouTube? I've got like 5 views on the YouTube version of the show, man. Nobody even listens there, so I don't know. I don't know what was up with that person. I just reported the facts as I found them, but yeah, kind of a bummer, man. Right before recording, getting a negative review, but then I don't even understand why it's negative, really, because that is what the show is. Like, if you don't dig it, just don't listen to it. I don't know. During my research for this episode, I decided I'm going to stop naming things Part 1, Daredevil's Part 1 or Killer Whatever's Part 1. I found almost 24 writers who have killed people. I could easily do 3 episodes about this, and that's been the case with a few of my more recent episodes, but I never know when I'm going to get back around to doing the Part 2 or 3 or whatever. So first episode of anything that may have a follow-up is just going to be the basic title, and I'll tack on whatever part in the series it is whenever I get around to the next installment. That being said, there probably will be a part 2 of this topic at some point in the future. But let's get into it. Writers, man, they're everywhere. Movies, television programs, books, comics, newspapers, blogs, websites, podcasts, talk radio, news, the instructions to build the bookshelf you bought from IKEA, the list goes on and on. If words enter your ears or eye holes outside of an impromptu conversation with another human, those words were written by somebody. And if I'm being honest, some people, especially those of us with Asperger's or autism, even pre-write large chunks of what seems like casual conversations. Whether they do it for the paycheck, the need to document and convey information, or the inexplicable drive we have to create something that wasn't there before us, writers are constantly building and maintaining the foundation of all human knowledge and experiences. So it stands to reason that over the course of human history there have been many, many writers, hundreds of thousands if not millions. It's one of the few professions that doesn't really require any verification or bona fides. One simply has to declare themselves a writer and produce something made of words to back it up. No college or money or connections or special equipment needed. Yes, in modern times, the agent and the publishing company have often become the middlemen between authors and financial success, But that's just a construct and can be subverted. At its core, a writer is nothing more than someone who arranges words into a useful or entertaining context. That's it. And as with any demographic, the larger the population grows, the larger the number of criminal elements within that population. So it stands to reason that at least a few of them would be murderers, and those are the ones we're talking about today. Murder, they wrote, killer authors. Now, I'm not talking about people who went to prison and became writers while they were inside. There's lots of people that pen stuff once they're in the clink. I'm talking about people who were writers or well on their way to becoming writers before they killed someone. Within 15 minutes of starting my research, I had a list of at least 13 known writers who had killed their significant others, a handful that had murdered family members, and only a few that had killed people they weren't related to or fucking. So if you're related to or in a relationship with a writer, you may want to rethink your life choices because there's a big chance they're going to kill you. With that being said, you can find my novellas Isaac and Becoming Zombie, as well as my comic book Risher on Amazon. Now, was that a plug or a warning? Maybe a little bit of both? And with that, we're going to get into the bloody, stabby, murdery, deaddy, death that is the guts of this show. First up, Anne. And your brain immediately went to Anne Rice, didn't it? Well, as sure as I am that Anne Rice's backyard has more corpses than John Wayne Gacy's crawl space, she hasn't been caught yet. We're talking about Anne Perry, best-selling author of the Inspector Monk and Thomas Pitt series. I'm not really familiar with either one. And Anne's case is what I meant earlier when I said we're only covering writers that were already writers at the time of their murder or on their way to becoming one. Now, she murdered someone at 15 before she was an established author, but you can tell by the way she's described that she was already creating worlds inside her head. She just hadn't yet fleshed them out and put them on paper. So anyway, Anne Perry. To even begin telling her story, we have to get the name right, as Anne Perry isn't her real name. While it isn't unusual for authors to use a pseudonym, most of them don't do so in order to mask their true identity as a participant in what was one of the biggest murder cases in the history of their home country. Anne Perry was born Juliet Marion Hulme on October 28, 1938 in Blackheath, London to physicist Dr. Henry Rainsford Hulme, so she was of some means, not rich, but her family was doing okay. Juliet was diagnosed with tuberculosis as a child and sent to live in the Bahamas and South Africa in hopes that a better climate would help her battle the disease. Apparently they hadn't heard of Colorado Springs. I couldn't find what age this started at, but she rejoined her family in New Zealand at 10 years old when her father took a job as rector of Canterbury University College. And rector is like dean or senior official at the college. I saw some reports that she rejoined her family at 13, but there are photographs of her arriving in New Zealand in 1948, so she would have been 10. There she attended Christchurch's Girls' High School, and I assume being separated from her family at such a young age for so long probably gave her trust and abandonment issues that would follow her for the rest of her life. Let's find out if I'm right. At the Christchurch Girls' School, Juliet met Pauline Parker, who was 5 months older and suffered from osteomyelitis, a painful bone infection, and the two bonded over their respective medical conditions. Pauline had an interest in art and writing and showed talent sculpting with clay. As the friendship developed, the pair created an elaborate fantasy life together, often sneaking out and spending the night acting out stories involving the characters and places they had created. The girls invented their own personal religion with its own ideas on morality. They rejected Christianity and worshiped their own saints, envisioning a parallel dimension called the Fourth World, essentially their version of heaven. The Fourth World was a place that they felt they were already able to enter occasionally during moments of spiritual enlightenment. By Parker's account, they had achieved this spiritual enlightenment because of their friendship. Eventually, the girls formulated a plan to flee to the United States. They made plans to move to America after high school to chase fame and fortune. Their parents found this disturbing and became worried that the relationship might be sexual. A therapist Pauline's parents took her to didn't help quash these concerns. At the time, homosexuality was still considered a mental illness, and as such, the parents, thinking they were doing what was right, tried to keep the two from hanging out together, though by all accounts those attempts failed for the most part. To this day, Juliet, Anne, whatever you want to call her, insists it was not physical or romantic in any way. In 1954, Juliet's parents separated when her mother cheated on her father with a lodger that had been staying with them. Her father resigned from the college and planned to move back to England. And I found two conflicting statements at this point. One said the dad was sending Juliet to live with relatives in South Africa, supposedly for health reasons, but to also distance her from Pauline. The other story says she was just going with him to England. Either way, it would result in her being separated from Pauline. When Pauline asked if she could accompany Juliet to wherever she was going, both sets of parents said no. So obviously, what's the solution here? If you're a logical, rational human being, you want to go with your friend to wherever she's moving to, your parents say no, you come up with a plan to murder Pauline's mother, then flee to America. You know, you could just skip the murder part and run away. I will never understand stupid-ass plans like this. We'll kill him and then take the money in the car and drive off to Never Ever Land. Yeah, or you could just skip that first part and do all the rest of those things without murdering someone. It seems to me that sometimes people just want to kill somebody. Now, according to Pauline's diary, the girls began planning to murder Honora Parker, also known as Homora Reaper, as she was not actually married to Pauline's father, in early June 1954, and put it into action on June 22nd when they asked Honora to go on a hike with them through Victoria Park in Christchurch. Juliet dropped an ornamental stone knowing Honora would bend over to pick it up. This is when Pauline struck Honora in the head with half a brick inside a stocking. So they threw her a sock party. Brick, rock, billiard ball, can of soda, batteries, whatever in a sock and swing on them. That's what Pauline did. She expected to kill her mother in one blow, but it took at least 20. 20 smacks to the skull with half a brick. How do you think that's going to look? Do you think you can make someone believe that she just fell down and hit her head? No, of course not. She probably looked like ground beef, but the girls didn't really think about that. After committing the murder, the two girls fled, covered in blood, back to the tea kiosk where the three of them had eaten only minutes before. They were met by Agnes and Kenneth Ritchie, owners of the tea shop, whom they told that Honora had fallen and hit her head. Her body was found by Kenneth Ritchie, with major lacerations around the head, neck, and face, and minor injuries to her fingers. Police soon discovered the murder weapon in the nearby woods. The girl's story of Reaper's accidental death quickly fell apart. The trial was sensational in New Zealand, with speculation about their possible lesbianism and insanity. The girls were convicted on August 29, 1954, and as they were too young to be considered for the death penalty, each spent just 5 years in prison at the discretion of the Minister of Justice. Some sources say they were released on condition that they never contact each other again, but Sam Barnett, then Secretary of Justice, told journalists there was no such condition. Parker and Hulme are not believed to have had any contact since the trial. Following her release from prison, Pauline Parker spent some time in New Zealand under close surveillance before being allowed to leave for England. Since 1997, she's been living in the small village of Hoo near Strood, Kent, and running a children's riding school. As an adult, she became a Roman Catholic. She expressed strong remorse for having killed her mother and for many years refused to give interviews about the murder. The story of the murder was adapted into the 1971 French film Don't Deliver Us from Evil and into Peter Jackson's 1994 film Heavenly Creatures. But what of Juliet Hulme, aka Anne Perry? After being released from prison in November 1959, Hulme returned to England and became a flight attendant. For a period of time, she lived in the United States, where she joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in 1968, so she became a member of a socially accepted cult. She later settled in the Scottish village of Port Mahomack, where she lived with her mother. Her father had a distinguished scientific career heading the first British hydrogen bomb program, and she took the name Anne Perry using her stepfather's surname. Her first novel, The Carter Street Hangman, was published under this name in 1979. Her works generally fall into one of several categories of genre fiction, including historical murder mysteries and detective fiction. Many feature recurring characters, most importantly Thomas Pitt, who appeared in her first novel, and an amnesiac private investigator named William Monk, who appeared in her 1990 novel The Face of a Stranger. By 2003, she had published 47 novels and several collections of short stories. Her story Heroes, which first appeared in the 1999 anthology Murder and Obsession, won the 2001 Edgar Award for Best Short Story. In 2005, she appeared on The Trisha Show to discuss the crime on a specially themed episode. A 2009 documentary film, Anne Perry Interiors, gave a snapshot of her life and the people close to her. She became a millionaire, an international best-selling author. She gets paid to make appearances and has hordes of fans that defend her past. I wasn't able to find an exact number on her bibliography, but she's easily written over 50 novels, and she's just chilling, living life, doing her thing. Now, my wife and I had a conversation based on this question, and I'm going to ask you the question, does she deserve her success? On one hand, she's a murderer. On the other hand, she committed the crime when she was still a kid. Depending on how you look at it, a lot goes into deciding what makes one an adult. I know I was an adult at 15. That's just the way my parents had raised me, to be prepared for adulthood by that age. But is a 15-year-old girl with attachment and abandonment issues in 1950s New Zealand a grown-ass woman at 15? I don't know. But she was 15, she was convicted, served her time, got out, and has been a model citizen ever since, and apparently so has Pauline. Should the mistakes of a young teenager follow them forever? Should she be punished for the rest of her life and denied success over her mistake, or has she served her time, been a good person, and proven that the rehabilitation prison is supposed to be actually worked out in her case, and she should now be free to move about normally in society and be welcome to all it has to offer? Of course, there's no right or wrong answer, it's all subjective, but it's a hard question for me to come to an answer on personally. You know, she was a kid, she had trauma early in life, clearly some sort of mental issue surrounding the friendship. It's hard to say. Moving on, how many of you have kids that read books? Are you familiar with the titles Little Rabbit series, Last Polar Bears, Higgledy Piggledy Pop, or the multiple other books by children's author Harry Horse? Now, I could have found some smart-ass way to call Dr. Seuss, aka Ted Geisel, a murderer for driving his cancer-riddled wife to kill herself over his infidelity with a friend, but I didn't have to do that in order to find a murderous children's author, because I found Harry Horse, whose government name was Richard Horne, and this shit right here gets brutal. Richard Horne, pen name Harry Horse, was born May 9th, 1960 in Coventry, Warwickshire, England. Over the course of his life, he was an author, illustrator, and political cartoonist, in addition to being frontman of the band Swamp Trash and creating the computer game Drowned God: Conspiracy of the Ages. He was the son of Henry Horne, a chartered surveyor, but his parents separated when he was 2, and when he was 7, Horne was sent away to a boarding school. That was the making of me, he later recalled, for all the wrong reasons. We were hugely influenced by coldits with escape committees in the dorms, floorboards that prized up store secrets. I was the map maker and did things like forging weekend passes. The ingenuity of children is immense, and most grown-ups don't realize it. Bad handwriting at school turned his surname into the nickname Horse, which later combined with Damon Runyon's character Harry the Horse to create his cartooning pseudonym Harry Horse. On leaving school, Horse started work as a solicitor's clerk, but in 1977 he decided to leave Coventry for Edinburgh, where he hung around the university's art department and sneaked into life drawing classes. As he noted later, if you look like a student, you're basically a student. That was my philosophy at the time. He illustrated his first children's book soon afterwards, and in 1983 made an impressive debut as an author and artist with the Ogo Pogo, My Journey with the Loch Ness Monster. Horne was also a devotee of Cajun music and played the banjo, having been involved with the formation of 2 bands, Swamp Trash in 1987 and Hexology after Swamp Trash disbanded in 1989. From 1987 to 1992, Horne was also a political cartoonist for Scotland on Sunday, and his illustrations appeared in The Independent, Observer, Vox, and The New Yorker. In 1993, due to pressure of work, Horne left Edinburgh for London. He then created, designed, and wrote a cult computer game for Time Warner called Drowned God, offering a conspiracy theory-based alternative history of the world. It took 3 years to develop, and Horne called it the hardest work that I have ever done. Drowned God was launched in America in 1996 and sold over 30,000 copies during the first 2 weeks. Horne was known for his innocent bewilderment and dramatic outrage. He railed like an Old Testament preacher, recalled a friend. His anger a joy to behold. And he looked that part too, dressed in long black trench coat, Napoleonic hat, his great-great-great-grandfather's big biker-style boots. For a while he wore a Dali-esque mustache, which bizarrely seemed to complete the ensemble. According to his fellow cartoonist Martin Rosen, Horne was intoxicated by the smell of burning boats and bridges. Horne met his wife Mandy in Shetland while touring in Swamp Trash. She was their #1 fan, and they married in 1991. They lived together in the Shetland Islands, where in 2004 Mandy began to suffer severely from multiple sclerosis and Horne nursed her. Now, I have a friend with MS. Luckily he isn't dying from it, but it is a shit show of constantly being attacked by your own nervous system. Even on a good day, this disease cripples you in ways you can't imagine. And not everybody has Montel Williams money. You see him and you think, oh, MS isn't that bad, never realizing that it's the same as comparing Magic Johnson to other AIDS patients. Yeah, he doesn't look bad because he has near unlimited money to throw at the best doctors and newest medical solutions. Not everybody has that. And Mandy's case was so bad that she was wheelchair-bound and unable to speak for some time before her death. During the time Horne was caring for his wife, he became more and more disconnected from friends and family. In the weeks leading up to Horne's demise, his sisters had been planning to call him in an attempt to reconnect. Kay, the eldest sister that lived in the U.S., was going to be home for their mother's birthday, and she, along with siblings Mary Ann and Emma, wanted to bridge the family rift. But that call would never be made. The family now believes he cut them off in an attempt to strengthen his resolve to follow his wife down her, or their, path. Kay has stated they wanted to put her in a hospice and he would not have had any time on his own to be with her again. He used to lie in bed with her, and sometimes in the night he thought she had stopped breathing. He always said he would see to it, she would never know when. I think they had planned it a long time ago together. He had spiritual beliefs and he wanted to go on that journey with her. The pain of Horne's predicament could not be hidden from his family, and so it erupted in anguish. The last time Kay saw her brother was in 2003 when he visited her on the farm in upstate New York, where she lives with her husband and 3 children. My worst memory of him was that visit. We were raised so closely. We had a good childhood. I tried so hard over the years to help him, and now I wasn't able to. I had to listen to him say, "My beautiful wife is dying and there's nothing I can do about it, and I'm in hell." The visit ended abruptly after 3 days, and it was 2 months before he called to apologize. I had email contact with him, but in the last year, nothing. I think he was in a grave place. The last conversation Mary Ann had with him was in October 2005. She asked him if he had a good day, and he replied, "No fucking day is a good day." She says he was just so angry, you couldn't say anything right. Emma, the youngest sister who lives in Wales, last spoke to her brother in August of that year, a conversation which Kay and Mary Ann say was also characterized by anger. And yet it's clear from sitting with the sisters, listening to their tales of his many practical jokes, how dearly he was loved. But that love was no comfort in the final 2 years of the couple's lives, as Mandy's MS chipped away at her nerve and muscle functions. So why wasn't that call from his sisters ever made? On January 10th, 2007, a family friend stopped by to visit the couple and was met with a gruesome scene. The couple was dead, believed to be part of a suicide pact the two had made quite some time earlier, and Richard was in charge of executing. However, this wasn't a shot to the head for both, or a pillow over the face of one and a gut full of sleeping pills for the other, as most suicide pacts tend to be. This was bloody. Richard Horne butchered his wife and then killed himself as well as their pets. He stabbed her more than 30 times. After the first knife broke off inside her, do you know how many times you have to hit bone to break the knife? How are you stabbing someone that hard and not killing them? After the first knife broke off, he went and got a second knife and continued stabbing her while she fought him off, receiving defensive blows in the process. And despite the ferocity of the attack, Mr. Horne was unable to strike a killing blow, so Mandy ended up bleeding to death. He then turned the knife on himself, cutting up his arms, mutilating his genitals, and inflicting 47 wounds before also bleeding to death. And key statement out of all of this, defensive wounds. She fought him off. This story is largely touted as Romeo and Juliet, tale of two lovers spurned by fate doing the only thing they can to be together, but the fact that she had defensive wounds implies she either didn't want to be killed and he just snapped and murdered her, or, and this very well could be the case, that there was a suicide pact like everyone's saying, but he did it wrong. I'm sure she was expecting they would overdose, he'd smother her, or they'd shoot themselves, something like that. She sure as fuck didn't want to go out being stabbed over 30 times and bleeding to death. I mean, this guy had one job and he did it so wrong. And in Scotland, the police aren't required to report the details of such a crime to the public. An inquiry could be authorized and the details made public, but it's up to the discretion of the higher-ups in the justice system, and in this instance it was believed that making the details public would do more damage than good, so while the families of the couple were given the gory details, the story of a loving couple's suicide pact took off in the media, and the cops did nothing to dispel the story. And members of Richard's family distanced themselves from the whole ordeal for the most part, but his mother, Jo, did believe a formal inquiry should be made and the details released to the public. But I can see why most of the family wouldn't want that. When someone becomes estranged, it's on both sides. The person who has distanced themselves from the family is to blame, but also if the other family members don't make a strong enough effort to reconnect, it's partially on them as well. You know, they were planning a phone call. You just pick up the phone and call. You don't plan shit, you know. And so everyone on some level let this family drift apart, and the next news they get is their brother brutally murdered his disabled wife, then killed himself. Yeah, I can see why they didn't want to deal with the drama and the rumors and the whispers and the very possible hate they would receive, so they just distanced themselves from it. One person who doesn't believe it was a suicide pact is Mandy's father, who claims Mandy was supposed to go to the dentist with her mother the morning the couple was found. But ultimately, we'll never really know the truth. There were no notes left, no one who really knew if the suicide pact was a real thing, and no one who seemed to know what kind of spirits Richard and Mandy were in the days leading up to the killings. Personally, I'm leaning toward there probably was a suicide pact, but Mandy wasn't quite ready for it, didn't know it was coming, and definitely didn't expect Richard to execute it as poorly as he did. I mean, you can have a suicide pact, whatever, that's fine, they had no kids or dependents, their call, but if the person you are suiciding with isn't standing there saying, "Kill me now," it's not a suicide, it's a murder. He jumped the gun on the pact and in doing so murdered his wife, and not in the comforting, go to sleep and you won't be in any more pain way, but in the most painful way possible. And that's the part that tells me he was frustrated with it all. Despite loving his wife, it was too much for him to take. Now, go have fun reading The Last Polar Bears to your kids. Now it's time for 5 fast facts about writers. 1. There are real terms for writer's cramp and writer's block. Those terms are mogigraphia, for the hand cramps writers get when writing, and choligraphia is the proper term for writer's block. While we're on writing terms, I'll give you another one. Dysgraphia is the term for being able to write legibly, a known issue with Agatha Christie, who had to dictate her works to someone who could write legibly. 2. Friedrich Nietzsche was the first philosopher to write on a typewriter. 3. Hunter S. Thompson used to autograph books by shooting them, a tactic he later applied to playing what he termed shotgun golf with Bill Murray. You could either hit your ball or shoot your opponents. And by all accounts, he just loved to shoot shit in general, having famously shot at Don Johnson and terrorizing Jack Nicholson's family with a gun, and of course eventually shooting himself. 4. Stephen King was so drunk and drugged out in the 80s that he has no memory whatsoever of writing Cujo. 5. American playwright Tennessee Williams, best known for A Streetcar Named Desire, choked to death from inhaling a small plastic cap found on a nasal spray or eye drop bottle. And that is 5 fast facts about writers. Okay, one more and we're going to get out of here. Next up, the story of Liu Yongbiao. And typically I try to read a few sources and put together my own narrative. I don't like reading directly from sources if I can avoid it, but I think the New York Times put together a pretty good article on this one, and it's one of the few articles I could find on the story. So we're just going to open with a New York Times article from August 17th, 2017. In the preface to his 2010 novel The Guilty Secret, the Chinese author Liu Yongbiao expressed his desire to write a suspense-filled detective story about an alluring female writer who dodges arrest despite committing a string of murders. I came up with the idea after reading some detective novels and watching crime shows and movies, Mr. Liu wrote at the time. The working title was The Beautiful Writer Who Killed. But what was assumed to be a fictional crime story took a turn into reality when Mr. Liu, age 53, was arrested on accusations of bludgeoning 4 people to death 22 years ago. According to the news website The Paper, Mr. Liu was arrested at his home in Nanling County in the eastern province of Anhui. "I've been waiting for you here all this time," he told the police when they arrived at his house. The gruesome killings took place at a hostel in Huzhou in neighboring Zhejiang province on a November night in 1995, according to a local security official quoted by the newspaper China Daily. 2 men who spoke with Anhui accents checked in at the hostel reportedly with the intention of robbing other guests. But when one guest, surnamed Yu, caught them stealing, the 2 men were said to have killed the guest. To cover up their crimes, they then beat to death the couple that ran the hostel as well as their 13-year-old grandson. The police in Anhui opened an investigation into the killings, but the trail soon went cold. The biggest challenge was the suspects and the victims had no previous relationship. "It was very difficult for us to follow the vine to the melon," said the police. And that sentence gets the award for the most Chinese shit a cop has ever said. That should be in a fortune cookie. When you cannot find the melon, try following the vine. Anyway, during his more than 3-decade-long career, Mr. Liu found modest success as a writer. In 2013, he was accepted into the official China Writers Association, and he was the recipient of a prestigious local literary prize, according to the paper. But Legal Evening News, a Chinese newspaper, reported that Mr. Liu told the police that for years after the killings he found it difficult to sleep at night because of what he had done. Equipped with new DNA technology, the police reopened the case in June, hoping a cigarette butt found at the scene would yield clues. All these people getting caught with cigarette butts makes me glad I don't smoke anymore. I will never leave my vape box at a crime scene, you know. That's one that goes in my song that Adam Sandler wrote, or stole from me, really. Keys, wallet, phone, e-cig. Keys, wallet, phone, e-cig. I always have it. But I keep seeing these stories pop up again and again of people who got caught because they left a cigarette butt at the crime scene and now they can pull DNA from them. They began to zero in on Mr. Liu and his suspected accomplice, a man surnamed Wang. Several hours after taking Mr. Liu into custody, the police found and arrested Mr. Wang, now 64, in Shanghai. Chen Hongyu, one of the arresting officers, told the paper that by the time the police came to take Mr. Liu away, the writer had already prepared a 1-page letter to give to his wife. "I've been waiting for this day for 20 years and now it has finally come to an end," he wrote. "Now I can free myself of this spiritual torment I've had for so long." Liu later admitted in an interview that the gory details in some of his novels were based on the killings. In August of 2018, both men were sentenced to death for their crimes. Going back to the beginning of it all, what did they get from the lodger that they murdered, and then murdered the hotel owners to not get caught? Well, they chose their victim because he looked wealthy, he was dressed nice. They managed to get a ring, a watch, and a total of $1.50 cash. So they murdered a guy for what might have fetched $50 at a pawn shop and then murdered a whole family to cover up that murder. Somebody's mama didn't raise them right. During the reopened investigation, police checked around 60,000 fingerprints from people living in 15 provinces and cities. State media reported that no monitoring systems were at the boarding home, but detectives did get facial sketches culled from the recollections of witnesses, who also said the pair had accents from a specific province. Forensic evidence included some used towels, fingerprints, shoe prints, and other traces left at the scene. Xin Lianjiang, deputy director of Huzhou's Public Security Bureau, said both of the suspects needed money, and police believed that that was their motive. Wang was said to be a legal representative for an investment company, while Liu went on to become a well-known writer. His first published work appeared in a magazine in 1985. A film, a collection of short stories, was met with critical acclaim when it was released in 2005. He joined the China Writers Association in 2013, and the romance novel he published the following year was later turned into a 50-episode TV show. Damn, so he made some money. But it was The Guilty Secret about a female author who gets away with a string of murders that has now drawn intense interest in the crime writer. Let me tell you something, on Goodreads, this book has 2 out of 5 stars. Maybe it's a lost in translation thing, maybe to Chinese audiences it was the dopest shit ever wrote, or whatever, but it seems to have fallen a bit flat with American audiences. And as we've learned about most stories from Asian countries, there aren't a lot of details. I wish there was more. I could find more detail I could give about the murders or the backstory of the 2 asshats that murdered the 4 people. But I can't really find those details. Basically, all information available on this story seem to be various regurgitations of 1 or 2 articles, so that's all I got. And that is it for Murder They Wrote, Not Saying Part 1. What did we learn? Don't be related to or in a relationship with a writer, and don't write anything based on the murders you committed because they will be able to use it against you as evidence. Pretty short and sweet. As I tell you every week, NoBetterDeath.info is the website for all things No Better Death. Show notes, updates about what's going on with me in the show in the new 6 Speaks section, links to all the social media, links to where you can listen to the show. If you need to know anything about the show, it's there on the site. I'm using the Instagrams now, so if you aren't following me on there, get to following. The show is just No Better Death on Instagram, Facebook, wherever except Twitter. The Twitter handle is NoBetterDeath1. Follow, like, subscribe, retweet, review, whatever you do, wherever you do it. It really helps spread the dead word. Tell your friends if you would be so kind. And if there's ever anything you want to say to me or your fellow death nerds, death stories of your own you want to share, stories you want me to cover on the show, whatever you got, hit me up on Facebook, Twitter, or NoBetterDeath@gmail. That's how you got the New England Vampire Panic episode. OG Death Nerd Chris Albert said, hey, you should do this, and I did it. I am that easily manipulated. We're going to go out on a piece of a song I've been working on. It's nowhere near done, just a rough sketch, but I kind of got used to putting songs at the end of some episodes there for a while and then ran out of music, so I got a new something I've been tinkering with I'm going to tack on to the end of this episode. I will be back next week with Death by Selfie. That's a good one, so make sure you come back for that episode. I am Sick Grayson. Until next time, try not to die.